Mike Pence walking out of the Colts game yesterday. He's a big Colts fan along with Karen Pence. He split. He couldn't take it. The San Francisco team, half of them taking a knee during the national anthem. Mike Pence said he's had enough. He took off, said, I'm out of here. Goodbye. And even though Karen was all decked out in her paraphernalia for the Colts, they leave. Yesterday, Trump putting out his immigration policies. The House passed a budget resolution. All that. Well, we got to get somebody to explain all this, and who better than Congressman Dave Brat, 7th District, Republican in Virginia. Dr. Brat, happy Columbus Day, sir.
Hey, John, happy Columbus Day to you and your son as well. Hope you enjoy the ball game.
If we win, we enjoy it. If we lose, it sucks. I'll just be honest.
Right.
I'm very candid here, right? My son, very depressed after we got clobbered in this game yesterday. Plus, sitting there, I mean, have you ever been to Fenway? I mean, it's crammed in there, and the fans just are nuts with passion, not in a bad way, all in a good way. So we have to sit there and endure all of that. And, of course, we did get a little razzing yesterday. But we're back at it today, and hopefully it'll be a different story. The vice president walking out of the Colts game yesterday. Now, the Democrats are saying, Dave, this whole thing was staged. You're a football fan. I mean, they probably knew that there was a chance that the San Francisco players, 0-5, by the way, would continue to kneel. And if you were at a game, would you have done the same thing? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get to immigration coming up, and it's just kind of fundamentally bizarre these days that we don't want to put our country first and put our symbols first, and the idea that there's a protest over other issues right at the time when you're paying attention to the primary symbols of our own country. I mean, that's the part that just it's too hard to buy. And so then the other side says, well, they have a right to do it, and of course they do. And then Pence has a right to leave as well and make a statement from the second highest office in the land and to just express his displeasure that when we honor the flag with the anthem, this is not the time to be making other protests. And so it's clear I would do the same thing. And the left always says what they're going to do. And I mean, it kind of ties into immigration as well. That the folks on the left want to put the welfare of illegal immigrants and people from the rest of the world above the American worker. And it's fairly shocking. It's the same kind of thing. It's like, where did the love for this country go when you're claiming that people from the rest of the world have more rights than American citizens to high wages and to good schools and to getting a wage rate that's fair. And it's kind of stunning that the other party is working harder for people from the rest of the world than they are for the American worker. And I think that's why they're experiencing losses at the polling places and votes, because Americans know we haven't had wage rates go up in about 30 or 40 years. The emergency rooms, the schools, everybody is paying the costs for folks that are coming in, and they're all children of God. It's good, but you got to come in legally the right way. And unfortunately, a lot of the cronies up in D.C. are just all too happy with this cheap labor policy at the expense of the American worker.
You know what? It is really incredible, and it's a good segue because President Trump proposing to Congress today an immigration reform agenda that he says is focused on three things: securing the southern border, enforcement of current laws in the United States now, and the creation of a merit-based visa system. These are the three principles he has. Now, you look at these without, we have all the detail behind it. I don't have time to get into that right now. We can do that as we go forward. But if you just look at the principles of it, okay? First principle, stop illegals from coming in the United States illegally. That's why you have a country, right? That's why you have laws, right? So whether it be a wall or added agents, he says, I want a wall. I want another 10,000 ICE agents. I want another 300 prosecutors. So I want to stop them from coming in. Then after they're in, I want to be sure if they get in illegally that we follow the law to get them out, right? That they're prosecuted, due process, they get out, we ship them back out, and that we don't have sanctuary cities and things like that. And then finally, for people coming in illegally, I want to be sure that it's a merit-based system, just like Australia has, just like other countries have, that says we're not going to let people come in with all these visas to just bring in cheap labor and to screw U.S. workers and people that have a skill to get a job so they're not on welfare. How is any of this, how could anybody oppose any of it? That's my question.
Well, and you're exactly right. And so how could you? You could if, like President Obama, et cetera, you think the U.S. is the problem in the world instead of the solution. And so if your goal is to slow down the United States from being the exceptional nation that it is, then you may want to go down that road. But the rest of us don't agree with that at all. And at the last election, that was another, in my election, it was a key issue. In President Trump's election, it was a key issue. And even Bernie, et cetera, they realized they've made a terrible mistake with all this identity politics on gender, race, et cetera. And they've lost the blue-collar working man in Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, in Michigan and Wisconsin, and across the Midwest, because they all know what's going on here. And so one thing you raised that the people may not know was under Obama, the left would always ask for, thousands and thousands more of border agents, et cetera. And that is consistent with doing nothing, because you can have all the agents in the world, but if the agents can't do their job, which Obama explicitly forbid them from doing, I just want people to be aware of that. You got to have a comprehensive system where you not only ask for more border agents, but they have to be able to do their jobs. And ICE has to be able to work with local law enforcement, and none of that is happening. Even presently, it's not happening. And a lot of these sanctuary cities are blocking the actions intentionally, and it's in the papers, and they're admitting it. And so it's pretty stunning.
It is ridiculous. I don't know the argument to say you don't want to secure the border. I mean, the only argument for saying we want to continue to have a system that allows illegals to come in unfettered and unabated, and is a system to not crack down on this, which you have existing laws. We have a law that says you can't just walk over the border and get into the United States and everything is fine. So when you look at the other side and you say, well, we don't want to do that. Well, why don't you want to do that? Why do you want illegals to come in? Well, cheap labor and cheap Democratic votes. Those are the only two arguments. There's no other logical argument for this. So the senator from Chicago, I'm going to blank on his name, but Durbin.
Dick Durbin. Much. If you ask the left, what's the upper bound for how many folks you want to let in? We're already a very generous nation. We let 1 million people in legally, and then there's millions more with work permits and part-time worker permits and visas and et cetera. I mean, we're an incredibly generous nation. But the point becomes clear when there's no upper bound at all, right? I mean, it's just a full frontal assault on the rule of law. And in the midst of this anxiety, right, the left is all concerned that we're not loving enough and that everybody's got to love each other and all this kind of thing. And so while we have this instability and political anxiety that everyone acknowledges, they want to add to the anxiety. And so, I mean, that gives you a little hint as to what's going on.
The Democrats want cheap votes. The Republicans that look the other way, and the Chamber of Commerce's and Wall Street gangster banksters, they want cheap labor. That has been the devil's bargain, Dave, going on in the United States for a very long time. And it's going on right now, because you can argue DACA and you can argue and say, well, look, the kids are here, protect the children. It's not their fault. I get that. All right. And then you can argue the third piece of Trump's position, which is merit-based, and say it's not the America way, and we'll take your, whatever the statute says, we'll take your downtrodden and everything else. But there's no argument for Trump's initial pillar of his policy, which is simply to say, if you are not a citizen, you cannot walk across the border and stay and get welfare and be fine. I mean, you can't do that. I mean, there's no argument for that other than the argument of saying dissolve the country. right?
Yeah, well, well, now you're warming up to dissolve the country. Also, the Democrats are shrewd, and it's not really done. It's the hard left is really in on this, and Soros and the folks who want to destabilize the country. If you look, the Republicans are doing significant tax cuts right now. The Democrats, in their progressive budget, just proposed last week a $10 trillion tax increase, right? So and that's not a typo, a $10 trillion tax increase. And so where's the CBO scoring that? Where is the mainstream media telling you the effects of that? Well, what that would do is stop the economy and bring it to 0% growth or maybe negative. And then you have the business community with the nerve to give half the money of their money of business to the Democrats just to split the bet, right? Just to make sure you're covered on both sides of Crony Avenue up in D.C. Then big business, right, the cronies. I'm not talking about all big business. I'm not talking about small business. I'm talking about the big business cronies in the chamber. They have the gall to put their bets down on both sides of the street when the Democrats are putting in a $10 trillion tax increase, right? And so that's what's going wrong in this country. People aren't standing up for the American principles that made us great, the Judeo-Christian tradition, the rule of law, and free markets. And big business needs to be called out on this kind of stuff when they're making the wrong bet, because the Democrats are shrewd. They're using this to split the Republican base, right? If you lose the business community as Republicans, you're in trouble. And so we need to call out business and say, are you pro-business or not? Following the fair rules of the game that we've set up for the last 200 years that made us so great.
Well, Dave, the crony swamp creatures on Wall Street and K Street and Silicon Valley, they don't care who wins, Democrat or Republican. It doesn't matter.
Right.
They're not part of a party, Dave. If they are, it's the Green Party, and it's not green for the environment, Dave. It's green for cash. I mean, that's what this whole thing is. They make so much money. They don't care who wins. That's why they put bets on two sides, because to them, there's one party, and it's about them making money at the expense of the American worker. And it's been going on and going on. And finally, this president has called it out. Congressman, let's get to Thursday's House passes a budget, paving the way for what could be tax reform. In a 219 to 206 vote, lawmakers approved a budget resolution for 2018 that sets up a process for the GOP tax bill to come before the Senate when they only need 50 votes and not 60 votes, as complicated as this is. Now, 18 of your colleagues, Congressman Brat, voted against the resolution along with all the Democrats. What did you make of the whole thing?
Yeah, well, in this, there's a lot of symbolism in that, but it basically was just a tax vote, right? We've already passed all 12 appropriations bills, and so you are voting on the budget, which is kind of a cheerleading document, right? But the budget is beside the point right now because you've already passed all the spending bills, which is not, following regular order. This was a bizarre term just because the healthcare debacle put us way behind on the schedule. So we passed the budget, which allows us to do reconciliation and tax reform. And so some of the folks just did not like the budget. Some of the defense folks didn't like parts of it. Some on the left, wanted to see way more domestic spending and not as much military spending. And going forward on the tax side, there's going to be some people that are voting no on the basis of the tax, right? Some of the folks from the northeastern, more Democrat-leaning states don't like, the state and local tax deduction idea, et cetera. And some people want to see, way more generous benefits packages included in there. And so that's some of the rationale for the no votes. But overall, it's good news. We're making progress on this, and this thing was pre-negotiated, right? The tax package was pre-negotiated with the 2 people from the House, 2 from the Senate, 2 from the White House, the gang of 6. And so that means this has, it should go through in a month if Washington was rational. But you'll see with the Senate now, with all the drama with President Trump and all the Corker and all this new news lately, we'll see if we get any, personal animosity leading to some tensions on the tax package.
Well, It's going to pass the House, right? The president's basic tax principles, because you guys were helping to negotiate it through the committees. We can predict that it's going to pass the House with minor revisions. Is that a safe prediction?
Well, I don't know. We'll see. I'm hopeful that's the case, but we'll see. Once the swamp hasn't gotten involved at all yet, right?
We
haven't named the exact deductions yet. We haven't even named who's in what bracket yet.
Right.
And so we'll see after that comes in. But there'll be some revision, and it'll probably get through the House. And then the Senate, oh boy, who knows what will happen there.
You know, it should be interesting, because when it passes the House, I've been predicting it isn't going to pass the Senate anyway, because you're going to find another 3 senators that are going to object to something, Republicans, because they're part of the block Trump agenda schematic. And there'll be something in there that the swamp didn't get. And then the whole thing is going to blow up again, and we're going to get nowhere. I hope that's not accurate. I hope it's going to go forward. We'll see how it plays out. Let's get to, I got a couple more minutes, Congressman. This week coming up, top things you're working on. What are they?
Well, the Freedom Caucus is just tries to always work on the biggest, most important pieces where we made promises to the American people. So, I mean, we're still working a little bit on the health care piece because we wanted a repeal. So we're still thinking through how in the world can you bring that up and get a healthcare system which lowers prices for everybody, right? I mean, Anthem just announced the new premiums going up 50%, I think, in the individual market coming up for this year. I mean, it's just staggering. So that's in the back of our heads. And we've been at the forefront of tax. And we told, our own leadership, hey, we want to see that thing before we vote on it, right? And so we made huge progress on that. We made the other health care bill better. And now now at the forefront is going to be this immigration piece. And so that's probably the piece we're going to be working on this week, just ensuring that we get a good negotiating bargain that's good for the American worker and good for our tax system and good for the schools. And people forget, people are eligible for upwards of $40,000 in benefits from the federal government level. And if you have 2 kids in schools, right, and we're talking about immigrants, illegal immigrants, et cetera.
Right.
If you got 2 kids in school, that's $26,000 a year. And then you get free emergency room care no matter who you are, right, in this country. If you walk into an ER, you get free health care, free emergency, even if it's $50,000.
Doesn't matter.
And who's paying for that? The taxpayer.
Right.
And so you got to make sure you're carving out a system. And now with chain migration, people can bring in their extended families, and that has implications for the elderly, Social Security, Medicare, which are already going bankrupt. And so if we keep in law the idea that you can bring in seniors, and we're already bankrupt on those systems, I mean, you can just see it's just a fiscal train wreck coming at us. And so we're working on all those issues.